Absolutely, yeah. What a wonderful presentation on a really interesting topic, and I don't think people have fallen asleep because there are lots of questions. So I'm there's questions on the Slido and on the GoToWebinar, so I'm just going to try and pull them together. So the first one, we have a few about sort of time ranges. After what time can a PMA be stopped? Do measures like power being reached play a role here? And what's the kind of general time from project starting to publication of the PMA?
So I think we can both say something on that. But I think first of all, it obviously depends a lot on the trials and how long those take. We've just shown that last example of the PMA that was done in a few months. And that's definitely the fastest PMA that I'm aware of. So there's other PMAs, they can obviously take some time because we're waiting for trials to complete. Sometimes there are follow-up periods. So they can take a while. But I mean, that also is just because it takes a while for the primary evidence to emerge. So if you compare that to wanting to do a meta-analysis on this research question, you wouldn't be able to do that any quicker in that sense because the trials aren't there yet that you want to combine. So yeah, it very much depends on the trials. We also usually have advised people to wait until individual results are published, even though I think that's starting to ease a little bit as data sharing becomes more common. So people are starting to feel more comfortable to collaborate and publish summary results before they publish their own results, and that can also influence the timeline. Kylie, did you want to add to that? Sorry, I feel like that's not a very concrete answer, but it's very much a depends answer. It can take some time, but it very much depends on the individual trials that are being included.
I think you covered all the key points that I was going to say, but just for example, the EPOC, Early Prevention of Obesity PMA, recruitment started in pregnant women and then we followed their children up to 5 years. So as you can imagine, that took quite a bit of time. So it just depends on the length of follow-up to a great extent as well.
There's
yeah, sorry, Ellen?
So I was going to say there's actually a very similar question that kind of follows on to this around whether you recommend doing interim analysis of trials as the results become available for some, but maybe not all.
That is a great question, and actually something we've been thinking about quite a bit. I mean, we obviously need to be careful with interim analysis, similar to when we do a clinical trial, just because we don't want to test again and again and again until we find what we're looking for. So what we do, it depends a little bit on what the time frame is and how long it takes for studies to complete. And then there's also the question of data safety monitoring or testing, so I can actually release the results. I think those are data safety monitoring. We definitely recommend for trials to work together, and because we don't want people to keep recruiting participants if there's already a very clear answer. For actually conducting our PMA for completion, I would say we'd usually try to pre-specify when studies are completed and when we think we have enough power to analyze, and then wait until all those studies that we wanted to include in the primary cycle are actually completed, just to avoid this problem of testing again and again and again. But yeah, if there's a study that takes another 10 years, we're possibly not going to wait for that. We're going to pre-specify that we won't. Kylie, do you want to add? No, okay.
Brilliant. We've got a few other questions about how you study and how you handle variation in study quality from these trials that you reach out at an early stage, and if there is variation in the quality, how that's handled through the process and through the sort of systematic review stages of the process.
So I'll start on this one, I guess. This is also something that we've been looking into in quite a bit of detail, because I know Cochrane has recently had more of a focus on this as well. So we've been looking at general checklists to look out for in terms of quality. And obviously the first step is always contact authors if there's anything that we're not sure about. But yeah, I think in the standard risk of bias assessments as well. Lena?
Yeah, we definitely have the advantage that sometimes we can preempt some quality issues. So, for example, the neoprom example that Kylie had, studies were only eligible for inclusion if they had blinded oximeters, which is quite an advanced technology to have in a trial, and the trials work together on how to best blind this. So sometimes we can, through these collaborations, particularly if they happen early on, we can think about how can we reduce bias and communicate with each other to have a more solid study design, and potentially even have a bit more quality checks in our inclusion criteria. But other than that, we would also assess similarly to how you would in a retrospective review.
Wonderful. And then on the Slido app, there's a couple of questions about how you address author credit and any challenges around getting author permission to use their trial data in a PMA prior to the study publication, and experiences around that.
Do you want to start on that, Kylie?
We like to, as we said, PMAs are very collaborative. So ideally, we encourage everyone to provide input, which is then sufficient to meet authorship requirements. But alternatively, you can publish on behalf of the collaboration and then list the full names of the collaboration at the end. And what was the second part of the question?
So it was about author credit and challenges for getting author permission to use their data in a PMA prior to the study's publication, so the trial's publication.
Yeah. Do you want to answer that one, Lena?
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky one because, the way our publication system currently works is that people may be at a disadvantage if they first contribute to the PMA. And that's why we often do offer that, unless it's a very urgent question, we currently still often offer people to publish first, or sometimes they already share their data with us so we can publish right after theirs has gone through. So I think that is a bit more, some researchers actually just have done a small trial and don't have the potential to publish that. So we've had that quite a bit, that people weren't actually planning on publishing themselves anymore. And then they could get that publication through the PMA. I think the other thing is that people realize they can contribute to something that's a lot bigger and that will have a lot more impact than just their smaller study if they contribute to the PMA. So that's another point where we hopefully get some people on board with. But it is tricky in the publication system that is currently out there. And I think we try to recognize that and build trust and involve people in these decisions so they don't feel like we're overrunning them.
Great, and I think we have probably time for one more question. So we've got one here. Harmonization must be a challenge if PMA is possible, even up to data collection. How can this be done effectively if most studies are at an advanced stage? Any advice?
So again, we're also looking at this with one of our ongoing PMA. So I guess that the opportunity is mostly in adding harmonizing follow-up outcomes if the trials are in an advanced stage. So, for instance, just adding a question to a questionnaire or some more basic things like that in terms of the measurement tools. Yeah.
But the other thing is often we have the situation that some trials have already collected data, but others haven't. So sometimes we can harmonize at least some of the studies. Or otherwise, even if we can't harmonize that much, having that collaboration can just help us against these other forms of bias. So it can still be advantageous. But yes, but the earlier the better generally.
Wonderful. And do we have time for one more maybe? Sorry, I've got the GoTo webinar and the Slido. I think we've we've addressed most of them. I think there are some questions about, can PMA be combined with a network meta-analysis, or how is it different to a living systematic review? Maybe taking that second one, how is a PMA different to a living systematic review?
So a living systematic review, we usually conduct a normal search mainly focused on databases of published literature, even though some trial registries will also search, and it's more summarizing what's already out there. So it's summarizing things that have been published where results are available. Whereas in the PMA, we're looking at what studies will become available soon. But as outlined on the latest slide, we do think they have a lot in common, and I think the methodologies are already combined in some instances, because often for PMA, we want to update quite frequently. Often for living systematic reviews, people are starting to get an overview of what will publish then. So it's really just taking a step further and thinking about maybe instead of just waiting for the trials to become available, can we approach them directly? Can we work together to make sure they collect the outcomes that we need?